Κύριε Συτιλίδη, επειδή μιλάμε για τις αμερικανικές εκλογές, βλέπουμε στις δημοσκοπήσεις αλλά και όλες τις αναλύσεις στα αμερικανικά ΜΜΕ πως η Κάμελα Χάρις και ο Ντόναλντ Τραμπ είναι πάρα πολύ κοντά στο να κερδίσουν τις εκλογές και οι δύο. Εγώ αντιλαμβάνομαι ότι αυτή τη στιγμή και με όλους όσους έχουμε μιλήσει υπάρχει μια πόλωση στην αμερικανική κοινωνία. Πολλά διεθνή ΜΜΕ λένε ότι η αμερικανική κοινωνία είναι διχασμένη. Η ερώτησή μου έχει να κάνει με το σε τι οφείλεται αυτή η σκληρή πόλωση που βλέπουμε τα τελευταία χρόνια όσον αφορά στην πολιτική ζωή των ΗΠΑ.
I would say it's probably the result of several factors. One is simply the way politics has been working here in the United States for the last 15 to 20 years. First of all, we have lived until recently in an era of relative peace and prosperity, which is being very much upset, and we'll talk about that when we discuss international security affairs. But we've become very complacent about America's role in the world and about our economic status. And so we've had the luxury of getting involved in a number of less important things that are very divisive on a cultural basis. We have also the fragmentation of our political parties due to technology in ways that really no one was able to anticipate. We have social media in the United States where instead of everyone using the same general basis for news and information about politics and issues and international affairs, most Americans now run to their specific silos. Where do I want information that confirms my position, as opposed to being open to the other side's position on matters? We also have this very interesting phenomenon we hear in Washington, D.C. The parties themselves do not cooperate on many issues. So you have Republicans gathered in one corner, Democrats gathered in another corner, and because of the way our political system is set up with congressional races, it's actually, generally speaking, more in a politician's interest to not compromise with the opposition party, and they fear that they would be primaried in an election. They would be challenged by somebody who's more extreme, back in their congressional district or back in their state. So what you have is a situation where the minority in the extremes that pull to the far right or to the far left have far more influence in media and on Capitol Hill than their numbers warrant, if that makes sense. Lastly, I would say that we have a situation where I just think that America's economy and our society has become polarized from an education and class perspective. We have far more many people today who are college educated and tend to obtain a more progressive leftist education in college, and then you have a working class in America that's mostly high school educated, is involved in the trades and in basic vocations that we need to maintain our advanced industrial civilization here in the United States, but they tend to pull more towards the right and are less concerned with many progressive issues.
Τα τελευταία χρόνια βλέπουμε, κυρίως με την διοίκηση του Biden, αλλά και στο τέλος της διοίκησης Τραμπ, με κάποιες πρωτοβουλίες που είχε αναλάβει ο Υπουργός Εξωτερικών, ο Μάικ Πομπέο, ότι υπάρχει μια άνθηση στις ελληνοαμερικανικές σχέσεις. Το ερώτημα μου έχει δύο σκέλη. Αφενός, πού οφείλεται αυτό, και αφετέρου, εάν έχουν στηθεί οι βάσεις τα χρόνια αυτά, έτσι ώστε να συνεχιστεί αυτή η άνθηση στις ελληνοαμερικανικές σχέσεις, ανεξαρτήτου διοίκησης στον Λευκό Οίκο.
Yorgo, with all the difficult issues that you and I have been talking about here, both in terms of the American economy, American domestic politics, and a very uncertain and fragile international security landscape and world order, the good news is that we have the best relationship between the United States and Greece in our adult lifetimes, since World War II and before. And I think the strategic dialogue, which you correctly referred to as having been launched under President Trump and Secretary of State at that time, Mike Pompeo, and now continued and accelerated by President Biden and Secretary of State Tony Blinken, only has positive directions to proceed in whoever wins, whether it's Kamala Harris or whether it's Donald Trump. Keep in mind that under a Harris presidency, probably the most important advisor to a President Harris will be Phil Gordon. Phil Gordon is someone who knows the East Med and the Aegean very well. I had the pleasure of working with him when he was in the Clinton White House, and we had the first of my two international relations institutes, the Western Policy Center, just as I was able to work closely with Tony Blinken, who was also in the Clinton White House at that time. And so you have somebody who knows the region well, and if Donald Trump is president, Again, he gave us the strategic dialogue, and there are many people around him who understand the dynamics of the East Med very well and want to advance the strategic dialogue not only with Greece, but also now with Cyprus. But I think a lot of this, Yorgos, is also dependent on what decisions Greek government officials take. It can't simply be a matter of what Washington expects of Athens. It's what is Athens doing in its own interest in ways that harmonize with American foreign policy and regional security objectives. So let me give you several examples, if I might. One is, as I mentioned before, Greece and Poland are the two NATO countries in Europe most dedicated to a genuine domestic self-defense posture. 3, 4, 5% of GDP spent on defense. Greece, obviously, because of the constant Turkish threats over the decades. Poland now because of the invasion of Ukraine.
Στο σκηνικό το οποίο περιγράψατε μόλις, έχουν παίξει κάποιον ρόλο οι Έλληνες ομογενείς στις Ηνωμένες Πολιτείες όσον αφορά στον επηρεασμό κάποιων αποφάσεων από τα κέντρα εξουσίας στην Ουάσιγκτον?
Very much so. I mean, on the downside, we have fewer Greek Americans who used to be as engaged as they were in the 1970s and 1980s when we had the Cyprus invasion and people were still very much involved emotionally and from a policy perspective because the invasion was fresh. It's now been 50 years. And unfortunately, we don't have the same dedication from Greek Americans around the country. But the organizations here in Washington, D.C. continue to play a very, very important role in contributing to wiser courses of foreign policy and national security, whether it was Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, and now whether it's Harris or Trump. And they also have a very important role to play in terms of Republican and Democratic Party leadership that is able to talk to the president, whoever that may be. And the organizations here remain very much involved with the Congress. We have to remember the Congress plays a very important role because they provide the budgetary means to effectuate policy, and also the think tanks and policy institutes here in Washington, D.C., which is really where many of the ideas for new policies and new strategies emanate from. So yes, from a very holistic, comprehensive, kaleidoscopic perspective, the Greek American organizations continue to play a very influential role here in Washington.